Hey everybody, and welcome to the demo on Vault Replication. So what I have here on the screen is AWS Systems Manager, and I'm using Session Manager to connect to the active node in two separate clusters. So as we talked about earlier, I have a cluster in US East 1, which will become our primary cluster for replication, and I have a cluster in US East 2, which will become our performance replicated cluster. So the first thing I want to do is show you what we have here on the screen. So if I do a vault status, this is the primary. See, the primary is running on 10.0 subnet. And then if I do a vault status, which is going to be the secondary, you see we're running on 192.168 over there. So I'm going to clear the screen. The other thing I want to do is show you what I have on the cluster right now, which is basically nothing. So these are two brand new clusters that I just stood up. So if we look at Vault Secrets list, you can see that we only have the default stuff in here. Same thing in the secondary cluster, Vault Secrets list, we only have the default secrets enabled over here. What I want to do is just create a standard kind of KV backend, and then you can see once we get replication going, you can see that that gets replicated over to the secondary cluster. So pretty easy to do. I'm actually logged in as a root token here, but so we'll do Vault Secrets enable, and we're going to say the path equals Vault Advanced, and then it's going to be a KV store. So I enter here. So now if we do Vault Secrets list, so now we have our new KV store right here. Okay. The other thing that we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and enable another authentication method or auth method. And that's because if you remember on performance replication, tokens are not copied over to the secondary cluster. So we're going to need some form of authentication on the secondary cluster once replication is done. So I've cleared the screen, and I've also enabled an auth method here. So if you do vault auth list, you can see that I've enabled user pass here. I also have a policy already created. So vault policy read. And then I called it advanced. So it's just path star and then all the capabilities. So now I just need to create a user here for our user pass. So vault right off user pass users, and we're just gonna call the user Brian. Let's say password equals Brian, and then the policy that we want to assign to it is that one that we just called advanced. Awesome. So now we have a new user called Brian, password Brian, and the policy is the advanced policy that's right here. So once we enable replication, we'll get to see that all replicated over to the secondary cluster. All right, so now that we have that done, now we want to go ahead and enable replication on this cluster. So the first thing we want to do is do a vault write -f. And this is the same command that we showed in the slides earlier. We're gonna do performance replication. So we're gonna type in performance here. Remember, if we were doing DR replication, we would type DR there. So we're gonna enable that. Says it could be enabled, it's enabled, but it could be unavailable. So usually it takes a few seconds. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is just go forth with creating the secondary token. So we'll say vault write replication. Performance, again, if you're doing DR, you type in DR there. All right, so here's where the ID comes in that we talked about earlier. You need a unique ID for each of these clusters. And for this one, I'm just gonna type in US East 2 because that's where it's going to live, and that's where we're gonna submit that secondary token to the cluster in US East 2. So I'm gonna hit enter here. So there is our secondary token. So what we'll do is we will copy that out. And now we're pretty much done with the primary cluster right now. So we're going to go over to the secondary here. So I'm going to clear the screen. And again, if you want to see that nothing has been replicated yet, we can do vault secrets list. And you can see we still have the default stuff. Same thing for auth. So we still have the default stuff. So, all right, so now we want to enable replication. So we're going to say vault write sys replication. replication. We're going to enable performance replication, not DR. Again, these are all the commands that we went over in the slides. So here's where we're going to say the token equals, and we're going to provide the token from the primary. So we're going to hit enter there. So it says Vault has successfully found the secondary information. May take a while, so that's good. All right, so now what we can do is we're going to look at the status. We're going to say Vault read, and again, this command was discussed in the monitoring section. Sys replication status. So you can see here that we have data for both DR and performance, but DR, the mode is disabled because we have not enabled DR replication. Under performance, you can see we have the cluster ID, which that will match the cluster ID on the primary, and we can run the same command over the primary and see that. We can see that the secondary has known primary cluster addresses of the 3 nodes that are over in US East 1. Remember, those are running on 10 dots, and I do have those on 2 different subnets. So that's why you see the 10.0.10 and 10.0.11. You also see the mode. So we are running as a secondary. If it was on the primary, you see primary. So primary cluster address. So the same IP address. This is the active node over in US East 1. You see the secondary ID, which is US East 2, and that's the ID that we gave it when we created the secondary token. And then finally, you see the state. So this state says stream walls, and remember walls is write ahead logs. So anytime you see stream walls, that means the replication is already completed. So we can go over here and run that same command just so we can see the difference between it really fast before we check to make sure everything worked okay. So JSON, and we're going to say sys replication status. So again, pretty much the same information. Remember, here's that cluster ID. It matches over here, 6AAA E6A. Same here. You have known secondaries. Remember, this is a primary cluster, so the known secondary for this primary, it has 1, and that's the US East 2. We have the mode is primary here, and the state is running, which is what you want to see from a primary. So let's go over to the secondary now, and we'll need to log in. So we're going to say Vault login. The method equals user pass, because that's what we enabled. The username I created was Brian. I entered password Brian. All right, awesome. So if you remember before we enabled the replication, user pass wasn't even enabled, right? So now that the data and all the settings and configurations have been replicated from the primary over to the secondary, now within the secondary, we can log in using user pass. So I just logged in. So we are using the advanced policy that we set up earlier. So in here, if you want to do Vault secrets list, so now you can see here's that Vault advanced KV store that we created on the primary. Same thing for auth. So here's our user pass that we created. The other thing I wanted to show you here is just how fast, it'll replicate. So over on the primary, we do Vault, something like secrets, enable. We'll just create another KV store, one called test. Enable that. We go over here and we just hit up and find secrets. It's already over here on the secondary. So pretty quick, especially the fact that we're using AWS and peering. So there's little latency between the 2 clusters. All right, so the other thing I wanted to show as well is the complete failure of a primary cluster, and then how do we promote our secondary over to a primary so we can start pointing our applications over to it in the event that our primary goes down. What I'm going to do real quick is on my other screen here, I've got AWS up, and I can pull that over here just so you can see. But I'm going to log into EC2, and this is Northern Virginia. This is where our primary lives. Oops. And we're going to just fail all 3 of these Vault nodes. So we're going to say stop. Yes. All right. We just simulated a failure of our Vault cluster in US East 1. And remember, that was our primary. So if you go over here to the primary, right, the session doesn't even respond anymore because it's dead. So I'm going to go ahead and just close that one out. So over here, everything still works, right? So we can still do a Vault secrets list. Remember, we didn't do anything to this cluster, and this cluster can still live even though the primary is gone. What we're going to do is now we want to promote this cluster, which is still a secondary. We want to promote that over to a primary. So vault right, it's pretty easy, just a single command here. Replication, performance, secondary, and we'll say promote. All right, so now it says this cluster is being promoted to a replication primary. Vault will be unavailable, so it should take a few seconds. And if we just go up and find our replication status again, you can see that it has already been promoted to a primary. You can see the mode has changed to primary. It doesn't have any secondaries because, again, we're back to a primary, and the state is running versus stream walls. So now this cluster over in US East 2 was a secondary. We replicated all the data from US East 1 over to this cluster in US East 2. We failed the primary cluster in US East 1, and now we promoted this cluster from a secondary to a primary. Hopefully you understand how to do that in your environment now, and you feel more comfortable seeing it in a live lab. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next section.